Happy Sunday. Bye.
Okay. Today we are finishing our devotional series on the book Getting Along. And we're going to end with talking about a guide. Who do we turn to when we need advice? Who do we turn to when we need to vent? Who do we turn to when we just need a friend? Who do we look to guide us in those circumstances, or to guide us in everyday life, to just guide us in general? Who do we turn to? We all need someone with whom we can share our concerns, our triumphs, our sorrows, and our joys. Sometimes we just need someone to talk to and hang out with. So thinking about that, thinking about who we turn to as our guide for advice, for everyday needs, for sorrowful times, joyful times, I want to talk about Mary, the mother of Jesus. And I want us to think about who she turned to when she needed someone the most. So for a minute, I want us to think, imagine we are Mary. We're young. We're a very young girl. We've just been told by the angel Gabriel that we're going to have a baby boy, or that we're going to have a baby, and we're going to give birth to the Messiah. We don't know how. We don't know why. We just know we have been chosen to be this special person. Us as Mary, who are we going to turn to? Who are we going to talk to? Who are we going to go to spread the special news? And think about it for a minute. When we get the news of we're getting married, or we're having a child, or some great news, you've got a promotion, you've got a new car, you've got whatever, a new house, a new whatever, who do we go to? We want to tell somebody. It's just natural for us to tell somebody. But put us in Mary's shoes. Mary couldn't just go to anybody. And she couldn't just go to anybody for 3 reasons. One, she didn't understand it herself. She's not married. She was a virgin. How in the world is she pregnant? She didn't understand it. She couldn't wrap her human mind around it. Number 2, who would have believed her? Who would have believed her that she was carrying the Messiah? Who would have believed that she was chosen? Because Mary was just Mary. She wasn't anybody special. She was just a normal girl. So who would have believed her? And thirdly, if she did tell somebody, she risked Joseph leaving her if he didn't believe her. She risked him divorcing her. She risked the rumors of she cheated on Joseph, because everybody knew her and Joseph hadn't been together. So she could have opened up a can of worms if she told anybody this news. Now think of that. In our day and time, think about when you got pregnant. Think about when you got married. You couldn't wait to tell, or get engaged, I guess. You couldn't wait to tell somebody. You couldn't wait to spread the news. Don't you think Mary wanted to tell somebody? But Mary couldn't. Mary had to keep it to herself. But there was one other woman, just one, and she's another woman in the Bible that could possibly relate to what Mary is going through. And that would have been Elizabeth. And in Luke 1, verses 36, it says, "And behold, your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son. And this is the 6th month with her who was called barren." So here she is. Here's Mary. There's one other woman in the world that could possibly understand what she's going through. It's Elizabeth. Elizabeth was barren. She's old. And she's also having a special child. So Mary went and saw her. Wouldn't we? Wouldn't you go see that one friend? So Mary went and saw Elizabeth, the only person she could turn to, and it probably helped that Elizabeth was family. That does kind of help things in those situations, especially when you don't know what's going on, you don't understand something. It does help to have someone there, and usually your family is the one that is going to support you, that will understand, that will guide you in the right way. So Mary chose to go to Elizabeth. Now, if I was to guess, Mary would have chosen somebody else to guide her versus this old woman. Yes, she was family, but I would think Mary would have chose someone she had more in common with. But These two women, pretty much the only thing they had in common was they were kin, they were family, and they were pregnant. So I want to look at some similarities. Well, actually, all the differences. I don't think there's any similarities besides being pregnant and being family. Mary was young, and more than likely, she's at the beginning of her childbearing days. We know that this is her first time being pregnant. We know she was young. It tells us that. So Jesus was not going to be her only child, the one child. We have Elizabeth, who's old and was barren, and we know that in Luke 1 verses 7. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren and both were advanced in years. So here we have Mary and Elizabeth. Yes, they were both pregnant. One's young, one's old. One's going to have multiple children. Elizabeth, this is probably it. This is probably the only child she's going to have. And if we stay in Luke chapter 1, if we go down to verse 18, and Zachariah, Elizabeth's husband, said to the angel, "How shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years." Zachariah didn't believe it either. How do I know this is true? We're old, and she's barren. How did this happen? So that's the first contrast. We have a young and an old person. Secondly, Mary, we are not told if she had any support or any friends. She didn't have anybody to go to. Obviously, we can kind of assume, because if she had to travel to go see Elizabeth, why wouldn't you stay and tell somebody in your hometown? Why wouldn't you see somebody close to you? So we can assume that she did not have the support group, the friends in her home. Elizabeth, though, we see in Luke 1:57-58, her situation is a lot different. She had support from neighbors and relatives. Luke chapter 1:57-58 says, "Now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. And her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her." What happened? Neighbors and relatives rejoiced with her. Neighbors. She had support. She had friends. Thirdly, Mary wasn't even married yet. She was engaged, so to speak. She was going to get married. She was taking the steps to fulfill getting married. Elizabeth had been married for years. Years and years and years. Mary Elizabeth was old. She's been there, done that. Mary was just getting started. Even though Mary and Elizabeth didn't have much in common, Elizabeth was a great mentor, friend, relative, guide, however you want to categorize that, to Mary. And Mary was a great friend for Elizabeth. They needed each other in their times of need. They needed each other to kind of bounce ideas off each other to see, why did this happen to me? How did this happen? How do we have these miraculous births? What's going on? They found strength in each other to get them through the rough times. And that leads us into our famous Titus chapter 2. And we've talked about it. And what does Titus chapter 2, 3-5 say? Older women teach the younger. This is what's happening here. Elizabeth is teaching Mary. The older is teaching the younger. Younger women look up to the older. And maybe that's why Mary went. I don't know why she went to Elizabeth. We just know, hey, you want someone that has something in common with you, go see your, I think it was a cousin, but go see your relative Elizabeth. And this is exactly what we see happening. Exactly. We see Titus 2:3-5 play out between Mary and Elizabeth. The younger women seeking advice from the older women. Older women are likewise to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women. Train them. Be an example. To love their husbands and children, and to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Older women have a responsibility on them. Younger women have the responsibility to look to other people for example, to look to older women, to go to them, to be their guides, to be their mentors. Is that who we're turning to? Or are we turning to the TV? Are we turning to the world? Are we turning to people we know are bad examples, but it just makes us feel better? They tell us what we want to hear. Who are we turning to? Who do we look up to? Really think about that. If I was to ask you today, okay, who do you look up to in your life? Are you going to say an NBA basketball player? Are you going to say some college softball player? Are you going to say some famous musician? Are you going to say, not saying any of those people are bad or wrong, but let me narrow it down more, I guess. Who do we look up to in the church? Are our younger girls looking up to the older women? Should they be looking up to older women? Are our older women doing things right, I guess? That's not the right word I'm looking for, but doing the right things, acting the way they should act, being an example. Are our older women doing that? And as our younger women, are we looking to them? Are we following in their footsteps? We are commanded to do this. Mary and Elizabeth were simply there for each other. They were there. They were there to talk, cry, hug, whatever. They were there. They enjoyed spending time together and sharing their lives with each other. They had a great friendship. A friendship that was based off of Titus 2, but it was so much more. Are we a Mary or Elizabeth in our friendship? Are we one of those? Are we a guide? Are we a mentor? Sometimes we think we have to know all the answers and be the best of the best before we can be a friend or be a guide to someone, and that is not true. Sometimes we just have to be there. We have to listen. We have to care. We are called to be a guide and a mentor. Are we? Are we being that? And that is the close of this devotional. And in the book I was reading when I was doing this devotional, it said, going back to when I said you don't have to have all the answers, just spending time. And they gave examples of quilting together, of sewing together, or if someone likes to read, being in a book club or reading a book with them and discussing it. And what about gardening? I think about that while my kids have been doing farm school. They did some gardening. People who grow a garden. I grew up and my parents had a garden. And there's a lot of conversations that took place in that garden. A whole lot of conversations, sometimes just with myself and sometimes with my parents. But there's a whole lot of conversations that go, time well spent. And as you remember, I remember those memories. I remember things that happened in that garden. Simple thing, gardening. Can you be with someone if they go out? What about yard work? It's not my favorite thing. I would love to have a beautiful yard, but I don't. I kill everything, so I don't even try to grow it. So we just have grass. So, but what about that? What if you go over and you help someone plant flowers, or you help them trim their bushes? Or what if you're not able to do that, but when someone comes over and does that for you, you visit with them. You give them lemonade, or I guess for Mississippi, tea. You drink tea with them, or you give them a glass of water. You spend time with them. You listen to them. You ask how their day is going. Some people like to paint. Some people like to do all different types of crafts. Some people like to draw. You all know where I'm going with this. It's just spending time with that person. Maybe it's sitting there. I know one thing my dad and I used to do, Elizabeth and I did one today actually, was a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle. And I love that. And the time spent. Do you think we did that in silence? No. There was always a conversation going. Always. What about crossword puzzles? There's so much stuff we could do with each other that you don't really think is a friendship, is growing, is mentoring, just spending time with that person. And we just have to be careful. We are called, like I said, in Titus 2 to do that. And you may say, oh, well, like me, people my age, I'm too young. I don't have anybody looking up to me. Oh, no, you do. You do. If you don't have kids, there's always somebody looking up to you. There's always somebody younger than you. And there's, you might say, well, I'm too old. Nobody looks up to me. Everybody's looking up to you. Every single person watching this devotional has somebody looking up to you, whether it's a family member, whether it's a friend, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a coworker. Sometimes we don't even know people are looking up to us. But how are we acting in our friendships? Are we being that mentor and that guide that we're called to be? Or are we being that friend that just tells you what you want to hear, when you want to hear it, and how you want to hear it? So this week, I want us to think about the type of guide we are being in our friendships. Think about Mary, think about Martha, or not Martha, Mary and Elizabeth, and just think about how not odd, but how unique that friendship would have been in their circumstances. And let's try to be better friends this week. Next week, I think we're going to start the book Conquering Your Giants. I have not personally done this book before, so I'm going to look into it. But when I skimmed over the chapters, it seemed pretty interesting. So we will start that next week. So I hope everybody has a great week, and thank you for listening.